Today on Ag News Daily.
I'll tell you, the fungicide season should be interesting, mainly because of how a cool mid-May to mid-June was. So don't forget that before this, some parts of the Corn Belt were like 6 to 10 days off where they were for normally accumulating heat, which is really good kind of incubation weather for some disease pressures. And then it got really hot and steamy, and that's an issue.
Welcome back to the weekly edition of the Ag News Daily Show. I kind of felt like I was yelling.
You were a little bit yelling there. You're just excited to be back today.
I am, and you know why?
Why?
Next month is National Ice Cream Month.
And it's the 4th of July, and it's the National Hot Dog Eating Contest, and it's all the fun things.
July seems to get a lot of the fun things.
Except for the really hot, sticky weather.
I know. We saw a lot of heavy rain, which is going to lead to more of that muggy feeling. That was the theme for late of this week here in the Midwest and Central Plains and the Great Lakes region. This recent mix of heat improved that soil moisture, and it generally benefited the crop growth areas across much of this region. However, some producers will welcome more rain. I'd argue others would say we've got enough, especially after last night. That moisture just might be a bit too much. As of the latest drought monitoring period, only 9% of the Midwest is classified as being in drought. Recent showers and storms have chipped away at areas that have some of this dryness, though some of those spots still missed out on significant rainfall. The most notable improvements came to the upper Great Lakes region and parts of the Midwest here in the western Corn Belt. Further north, recent severe storms in North Dakota have caused significant damage, ranging from extensive damage to farms, grain bins, and irrigation systems. The North Dakota Department of Agriculture Commissioner Doug Goring shared that in a statement earlier this week on Monday. However, parts of northern plains areas, including drought-stricken Montana, did receive some meaningful rainfall. Scattered showers and thunderstorms are expected to continue across the region into this weekend, offering more chances for relief through some of the areas that may still be left dry. We'll have a full weather report, both short and long-term forecast, coming up with Eric Snodgrass later in this show, so make sure you stay tuned. And I did hear from our friend Bridget Riedel that there is talks of a potential derecho having gone through parts of North Dakota.
Yeah, and a really bad tornado late last week. That's where I actually was last week, which is why I missed the show. So I'm glad I got out right before that swept through the state. But USDA crop conditions report this week followed a round of mixed weather in much of the region. The recent report reflected 70% of the U.S. corn crop is rated good to excellent, down 2% on the week, with 97% of the crop emerged and 4% of the crop silking. 66% of soybeans are good to excellent, unchanged from the week previously, with 90% emerged and 8% blooming. 49% of winter wheat is rated good to excellent, a 3% decline from the week previously, and 96% has headed, with 19% of the crop harvested compared to the 5-year average of 28%. 54% of spring wheat is reported as good to excellent, a decline of 3% from last week. 93% emerged and 17% has headed. So we'll see how weather conditions continue to maybe delay some harvests there for wheat country as well.
You know, Snapchat and Twitter, those show those that can harvest are seeing good yields. We also saw a provision in the Senate. GOP's budget reconciliation bill is raising some concerns with sustainable aviation fuel industry. According to multiple industry sources, the bill is expected to return to the House later this week. Both the House-passed bill and the Senate Finance Committee's version would preserve the Section 45Z tax credit and extend it through 2031, widely seen as a win for the broader biofuel sector. But differences between the two proposals could have significant implications for sustainable aviation fuel producers. The House bill does not specifically mention SAF. However, the Senate version proposes reducing the maximum value of the tax credit for SAF from $1.75 per gallon to only $1, bringing it in line with the credits for road fuels like ethanol and renewable diesel. The potential cut has the industry leaders concerned. While the credit extension itself is welcomed, the reducing of the value for SAF could hinder new projects that are in development at this time when the fuel already faces some challenges under the existing clean fuel programs. Tom Miller, the head of biofuels regulatory affairs at BP, noted during a recent webinar that SAF is already at a disadvantage under the programs like the Renewable Fuel Standard and California's Low Carbon Fuel Standard. He said the higher 45Z credit was crucial to incentivize the driving investment in SAF technologies going forward. We'll expect to see senators to vote on the final reconciliation package here later this week before returning it to the House for consideration there. So lots of updates coming, and potentially next week more headlines to report on.
Yeah, but still, even if we do see some voting on this, won't really still see it go into effect until maybe later this year, if not early next year. Ongoing trade tensions between the United States and China have taken a toll on American farmers, costing them $2 billion in lost ag exports this year alone, according to a new study from North Dakota State University's Center for Agricultural Policy and Trade Studies. The report shows that from January through April of 2025, U.S. ag exports to China fell by more than $5 billion, marking a 55% drop compared to the same period last year. While exports to other markets did grow, rising 43% to South Asia, 39% to the European Union, and about 24% to Central America, those gains unfortunately weren't enough to make up for the steep losses to China. Specifically, in the beef industry, Joe Sheely with the U.S. Meat Export Federation says April beef exports were down 10% year over year, while pork exports dropped nearly 15%. He said, quote, most of the decline came because exports to China basically hit a wall. Sheely added that we were facing triple-digit tariffs on both products. While pork exports have somewhat rebounded, we're still seeing major challenges on the beef side. He told Brownfield that beef exports remain stalled due to bureaucratic hurdles in China, with very few plants eligible to ship to China because of the 5-year established registrations, which are supposed to renew automatically, but haven't been. I was also at Iowa Swine Day yesterday here in Ames, Iowa, and it was interesting. We were talking a little bit about ASF. It was interesting to note that a couple of the folks in the audience were noting China's younger consumers actually have just bypassed the consumption of pork altogether. Their younger consumers just really haven't been consuming it. ASF wipes it out from their population, and it's not really becoming a meat protein of choice. So despite improved trade with other regions, China's sharp decline in demand remains a major blow to U.S. agriculture, and with some of those shifts in tastes and preferences might continue to be here as we move forward.
That's right. Well, we've got more trade news. So continuing along that line, some headlines here, Delaney. The U.S. ag trade deficit has continued to widen in 2025, driven by those shifting global trade patterns you had just talked about. There is a surge, though, in import demand. According to the USDA's latest outlook for U.S. agriculture trade report, the trend shows no signs of slowing. From January through April, the U.S. imported $78.2 billion in ag trade goods, while exporting just $58.5 billion. That is a $19.7 billion shortfall. That's the largest trade deficit ever recorded in the first 4 months of any year, and puts 2025 on track to surpass previous annual records as well. After decades of consistent surpluses, the U.S. has been running at an agricultural trade deficit since 2022. The shortfall hit $16.7 billion in the fiscal year 2023 and nearly doubled to $31.8 billion in 24. Now the forecast, the deficit will be nearly $50 billion in 2025. This will be the largest ag trade imbalance on record. This, of course, will continue to impact producers' bottom line, so that much of ag goods will be exported beyond our borders, and that will hit our farmers here in the U.S.
Yeah, it's certainly a mixed bag as we're still seeing more products leaving our borders, but certainly bringing in a lot more product as well. Mm-hmm. Last Saturday, June 21st, President Trump ordered the U.S. military strikes on 3 nuclear facilities in Iran, escalating tensions in the Middle East amid ongoing conflict between Israel and Iran. Those strikes are already being felt at the pump. Patrick Dahan, head of petroleum analysis at GasBuddy, said, with Israel and Iran trading attacks, oil prices have continued to climb. He added few pumps have been immune, with nearly all states seeing gas prices rise over the past week. Dahan added that diesel prices saw their largest weekly increase since August of 2023, and he expects oil prices to continue trending higher following the U.S. attacks. Dahan told Brownfield this week that supplies are nearly 20% below the 5-year average for this time of year. Diesel is being a little bit more impacted because inventories are also extremely low. Whereas gasoline prices have inched up in some areas, 5 to 10 cents per gallon, depending on where you may be. President Trump announced a ceasefire between Iran and Israel late Monday. However, just hours later, Israel accused Iran of violating that agreement, an allegation Iran denied. Nonetheless, by Tuesday morning, President Trump expressed intense frustration as the ceasefire appeared to be on very shaky grounds. Despite the tension, the truce was still holding as of Tuesday afternoon, and things have just continued to escalate since then. Oil prices have dropped nearly $15 per barrel in response to the fragile ceasefire, and as we know, inventories being at some record lows, production dropping, prices, responding there as well. So continued impact here on the oil markets, Tanner.
Yeah, and after a week of back and forth on immigration policy, Tom Homan, the Executive Associate Director for the Enforcement and Removal Operations, more commonly referred to as President Trump's nickname Border Czar, confirmed late last week that the immigration raids will continue in agriculture and hospitality industries. The Trump administration had previously indicated that it would pause some of the ICE operations that could disrupt those sectors, but Homan's latest remarks may be interpreted as the administration is reversing their course. Homan did say that we're going to continue to do worksite enforcement operations even on farms and in hotels, which could harm some of those harvesting operations in our southern and western states. In other development, though, the American Farm Bureau Federation is applauding the Department of Labor's decision to not enforce the Biden-era Farm Worker Protection Act. The agency suspended this rule, which was initially struck down by a district court. John Walt Boatwright, the Director of Government Affairs for Farm Bureau, told Brownfield News that the suspension is particularly good news for farmers and ranchers who would use the H-2A guest worker program. There have been some different district court rulings that temporarily blocked parts of this rule in different regions. Boatwright told Brownfield that he also added that's created a patchwork of enforcement that is extremely difficult to navigate. I know this is a big discussion that's happened a lot amongst at least our listeners and those that have wrote in. So we can maybe chase that headline a little further in future.
And it's certainly been an issue that has happened for multiple administrations. So certainly not one that's going to be easy to solve for here. The USDA's latest cattle on feed report shows a slight year-over-year decline in cattle inventory once again. As of June 1st, 2025, cattle and calves on feed for slaughter in the U.S., feedlots with a capacity of 1,000 head or more totaled 11.4 million head, down 1% from the same time last year. The number came in line with most industry expectations. Analysts are calling the report neutral to slightly supportive for the market, but the overall message remains clear: supplies are still tight. According to drovers, several key states are seeing inventory levels well below 2024 figures. Texas is at just 93% of last year's numbers, and Colorado sits at 96%. However, some states are reporting higher placements. Nebraska is up 4%, Oklahoma is up 2%, and Kansas is up 1% compared to 2024. Fed cattle marketings in May totaled 1.76 million head, down 10% from May of 2024. Other disappearances for the month were 62,000 head, holding steady year over year.
I wonder if that plays into some of those beef export numbers as well. We did see some tar spot news for growers here in the Midwest. Agronomists are continuing to warn that you be particularly vigilant. this year as tar spot cases continue to grow. 6 Iowa counties, 15 Nebraska counties, 3 Kansas counties, 6 Missouri counties, 5 Indiana counties, and 6 Illinois counties have all reported at least one tar spot case, according to the Crop Protection Network map. Tar spot has been reported in the Corn Belt since 2015, and while its presence is not unusual for this time of the growing season, the University of Nebraska Extension is reminding growers that a recent article that scouting efforts should be intensified in fields with a history of this disease or at higher risk, such as pivot irrigated corn. They also remind us that fungicide applications are not recommended at this time for tar spot management. Multi-state fungicide research, which was led by Purdue University, showed results that applications made for tar spot management are most effective and economical when made in the R2 or R3 stages, even when the disease developed during early vegetative stages, like it has already shown up in these 40-some counties. I know with a lot of moisture around, probably going to add more counties to that list.
Yeah, certainly. I was trying to total up the number it was in last year, and I just couldn't even count the number. So lots of counties yet to be reported, I'm sure. But the first phase of a plan to dismantle the U.S. Agency for International Development, or USAID, and fold it into the State Department is set to begin next week with the first of 2 rounds of mass layoffs. But staff working on global food security and agriculture innovation are holding out hope for a last-minute reprieve. It's coming down to the wire, a senior USAID official told AgriPulse at as the July 1st deadline approaches. Under the Trump administration's reorganization plan, Jeremy Lewin, a former Department of Government Efficiency official now serving as acting head of foreign assistance at the State Department, told USAID staff in March that nearly all of the agency's remaining 900 employees will have their positions terminated by either July 1 or September 2nd.
Those are big numbers, and not in a good light either. We are seeing a lot of families gearing up for the 4th of July, as we talked about in the beginning of this episode. Celebrations will be feeling the pinch, though, from grocery store prices. It's always interesting to catch up with the American Farm Bureau Federation's Market Basket Survey. For 2025, they came out with their average cost of the holiday cookout for 10 people, which would be $70.92, just 30 cents less than last year's record high. That breaks down to about $7.09 per person, making the second highest total since the survey began in 2013. Farm Bureau Associate economist Samantha Ayub said that inflation is lower, so the ability for some food items to continue to keep prices stubbornly high for American families. The survey shows higher prices for beef, potato salad, canned pork, and beans, while Meanwhile, other items like pork chops, chips, and hamburger buns saw a slight price decline. For example, the retail price for 2 pounds of ground beef jumped 4.4% to $13.33. In contrast, a 3-pound package of pork chops dropped nearly 9%, coming in at $14.13. So it'll be interesting to see what's going to be on the menu at people's 4th of July parties this summer.
Absolutely. You'll have to tell us what's on your menu for next week, Tanner. But this week we're talking about all things weather, including maybe what the forecast will be for those 4th of July cookouts. We'll be catching up here with Eric Snodgrass of Nutrient Ag Solutions right now. Well, Eric, we're certainly excited to have you on the podcast again. I don't think you need much of an introduction. Folks really know who you are in this space, and you've done a great job of carving your niche as making weather interesting and exciting. So we appreciate you joining us on the podcast again today.
Good. I mean, because to be honest with you, Delaney, sometimes I feel like I don't understand it. So at least if I can make it interesting, that's at least a fun thing to do.
Well, let's start, Eric, here maybe in the short term. You know, we're getting hammered with severe weather, thunderstorms, some crazy storms here across the plains. Walk us through just maybe the last week here, what we're seeing as far as the systems that have been moving across the Midwest.
Yeah, well, we saw the Bermuda high move to Nashville. So that brought in heat. With that heat came some instability. And then around the edge of that high, we had just a lot of thunderstorms. And it's you go all the way back to June 18th. We had the derecho event that went through parts of North Dakota, the southern part of North Dakota. That was nasty. 17 tornadoes on the leading edge of that. A lot of damage. We lost lives with that one. Excuse me. And then on top of that, we had in the Eastern Corn Belt derecho event before that. That got all the way to the Eastern Seaboard. There's been a tremendous amount of hail. We watched another squall line, Big Boca, go through Kansas. And it seems like just in the last couple of days alone, some of the storms as they've popped have come through and produced straight line wind damage again. So, what's interesting is sometimes, and this is just my own perception, what often gets looked at is, there's rain out of all of this. And we miss some of the local damaging effects of a lot of these storms. But I'll say this, when you look at the last week's worth of precipitation, if you're tucked into the Eastern Corn Belt, if you're tucked into where the Mississippi and the Ohio River come together, there was a lot of folks that missed all of this and saw temperatures in the mid to upper 90s, even cracking 100 degrees. Some of those places picked up 50 stress degree days, and that was pretty rough on those folks. But if you're on the edge, you got a lot of rain. I was just talking with a guy yesterday out in Nebraska, and he walked out into a field that 12 hours earlier had 7 inches of rain, and he wasn't even leaving tracks in that field. That just shows you how ready parts of the Corn Belt were to take in some water as of late. So Delaney, that's what I've been watching. Heat, big time storms, and we have questions. Are we going to see this for the rest of summer? Is this a hot, stormy summer with hyper-local heavy rainfall delivery, or are we ever going to see the more extremes of the spectrum? I think that's where we're sitting right now.
Yeah, it's hard not to have backyarditis and see what's happening just in your area. But as we've got producers gearing up for second pass, spraying on soybeans and getting some side dressing done, potentially moving into fungicide season, what's the forecast look like here for what we think's coming next?
I'll tell you, the fungicide season should be interesting, mainly because of how a cool mid-May to mid-June was. So don't forget that before this, some parts of the Corn Belt were like 6 to 10 days off where they were for normally accumulating heat, which is really good kind of incubation weather for some disease pressures. And then it got really hot and steamy, and that's an issue. So we're going forward. There's going to be, I'll be honest with you, daily, lots of convection. But this is going to be the problem. In fact, I just addressed this with a lady this morning on my YouTube channel. She's like, man, your precipitation maps are terrible. And I'm like, well, what happened? Like, tell me, why are they so bad? And she's like, well, she was in Scranton, Iowa. And she's like, it looks like there's 2 to 3 inches of rain around us. She goes, I only got an inch in the last week. And I said, yeah, you did. In fact, in the last 24 hours, you only got 0.04 of an inch. And I can go to the west of you, north of you, east of you, south of you, and find places that picked up 1.5 inches. And I think we're going to continue to deal with that. I think it's going to be a problem where the way that thunderstorms deliver their rainfall is they do it fast and they do it very locally. And we're in this position every summer. There's no surprise in any of that. It's just the reality of where summer convection takes us. So if you want me to tell you, every morning you're going to have to look up and refresh your idea on where the forecast is. It's going to change every day, and you're going to be angry at it, because I would be. And it just points to this big problem we have in all of weather forecasting. Do you know, guys, the best I am in the entire year at forecasting the weather is late fall, winter, and early spring. We're fantastic. That's our best. We can see out the farthest. The weather systems are well defined. There's big fronts, big lows. The worst we are is in the middle of summer. And that's when you need us to be best. And the reality is we're just terrible. We're trying to figure out where these storms are going to be. And sometimes we nowcast rather than forecast. Now, I can tell you where the ingredients are. And I'll say it's going to be hot and stormy. But there's also going to be folks that are like, hey, you said hot and stormy, and I didn't catch a single one of these. And I'm just going to say, yeah, that's summer, and you know it. So it's a tricky time.
So hyper local events here in the short term, but as we look out into July and August as the crops are finishing up, does the forecast remain with maybe more hyper local focuses on rain showers? Do we turn hot and dry? As you just mentioned, summer is your hardest time to forecast, but what's your inclination telling you right now?
Well, I'll tell you what I watch every day. So when I wake up and I bring up my weather forecast stuff, I don't go to an app and I don't go to like a point forecast. I go to the Atlantic and the Pacific. That's it. And I look for these two big areas of high pressure that kind of flank North America. Now, the reality of it is when these two high pressure cells, one's called the Bermuda high, you know about that one. There's the Pacific high. When they make the squeeze in on the United States in the corner, so West Coast and Southeast, we will have in the midsection of the country lots and lots and lots of storms. It'll get hot, stormy, just all the time. We worry about them drifting. So if you get one of those high pressure cells to start to leave the coast and just waft off like the Atlantic or North Atlantic, or the North Pacific, well, we start to lose the forcing and the moisture transport to make all those storms. Now, there's always been some sort of worry that was going to happen. I look specifically at those years where the Bermuda high just drifts off into, somewhere in the way North Atlantic, and we get very hot and dry. And none of the models are really predicting that right now. So what I mean is that unless I see one of those high pressure cells move, I'm going to have to tell you that I think the greatest risk for being drier is going to be the Canadian Prairie to Montana, possibly the Northern Plains, maybe encroaching in on Nebraska and Iowa. But, late summer in Nebraska is hot and dry anyway. Like they're used to that. It's just, does it get farther and does it last longer? So here's the reality of all of this. On top of the moisture, you have the temperature side of it. And you're in Iowa and I'm in Illinois. So, when you look at those two states, we should care way more about temperatures than precipitation, to be honest with you. Because what could rob us of yield is if we see more of like what we saw this morning, where I checked into my hometown and it was 77 degrees this morning at 6 a.m. I did some work on this. I built what's called the convolution neural network. It's a machine learning technique that I said, hey, let's figure out what is the most dominant factor in Illinois and Iowa for corn stress. And it said keeping those overnight lows above 74 for a bunch of days in a row. We were daytime highs above 94 for several days in a row was actually accounted for 70% of the yield loss. So we understand this. This is a physical stress on the crop, right? It's unable to stop its respiration process so that it can use the energy to make bigger seed, right? So that's what we got to worry about going forward. I just want to know if it's going to be hot and stay hot like it's been. So I don't know. We'll see how it all shapes up as we turn the calendar here.
Yeah, it sounds like there's a lot of things that are similar to years in the past. We don't know, and we get to react, like you said, every morning and make our decisions based upon that. But I'm curious, what are our South American friends dealing with right now?
Yeah, well, they're in the middle of their dry season, right? So their winter. I mean, Mato Grosso state we talk about all the time. They get nothing. Like it's no rain for 3 months. So they're harvesting that safrinha crop, which we know from satellite estimates was one of the healthiest safrinha crops we've seen. And you probably heard some of the later estimates. It's a big one. We're trying to balance that out, though, with North American production. And, there's heat and drought in Europe that's encroaching all the way over Ukraine. So that's an interesting global picture, piece to the picture, I should say. But I'll be watching to see if any sort of winter drought develops in Argentina. And right now we've got halfway decent moisture coming into southern Brazil, which does get wintertime precipitation for them. But, they're just trying to harvest and get a crop shipped out. And it's the middle of the dry season. So the question will be, do the rains come back in October or do they come back in November? And long story short, if they come back in October, they go after it fast. It's a big crop that goes in early. If those rains don't come in until mid to late November, we've got problems for their next year's crop. And it's too early to make a call on when and where that rain's going to come and start and finish, right? So we'll just keep an eye on it.
Eric, keeping an eye on harvest. It seems like that's still a little ways away, but just want to maybe wrap up there as you look at September, October, November. What's your early forecast here for the U.S. harvest season?
Well, part of that's going to come down to discussion about the hurricane season, right? That's kind of the heart of the hurricane season, August, September, October. And there are still a lot of predictions that suggest that it's going to be on the above average side of things. The numbers that I hear all the time are 125% of average would be a good benchmark. We've got to watch the Gulf of Mexico, and we've got to watch the southeast coast as they could be delivering some of that moisture and possibly causing some issues once we get into that time of year. The other part of it is most folks are going to remember how dry last fall was. And we've had some very dry harvests in the last 3 to 4 years. And we like it until we don't like it, right? And so it's going to be a question of whether or not this fall is another one of those where the moisture just shuts off, or are we going to have legit fall precipitation? So I still think that's up in the air too.
Yeah, it certainly sounded well-spoken like a meteorologist putting your forecast together. It's just anybody's game.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter. Somebody's still not going to be happy.
That's right. And they're really not going to be happy because the markets are going to react to all of this as well. And if you want to talk about two of the most uncertain things in the world to try to predict, grain markets and weather, and honestly, that's the full risk package, I feel like, for our growers. And so I make light of it and I smile because if I didn't, I'd be depressed, but it's a reality of the business we're in.
That's right. So if our listeners want to stay in touch with you, or maybe this is for some odd reason the first time they've ever heard of you, Sure. How best do they stay connected?
Yeah, a couple of easy ways. I got a website that's real easy. It's free. It's agweather.com. That's ag-wx.com. And I also maintain a YouTube channel where I record videos every day with my colleagues. And that's pretty simple. Just go to YouTube and search Nutrient Ag Solutions and you'll find us there.
Awesome. Well, thanks again for joining us, Eric.
Yeah, you bet.
Well, it's always great to connect with Eric, and I feel like he needs a segment called What the Forecast?
That's a good one.
WTF.
Yeah, I like that.
Some uncertainty ahead, but earlier this week, Josh Linville from StoneX gave his media update that the attack on Iran's nuclear sites have been the talk of the world for the nitrogen market. The reaction from Iran is being watched very closely, as expected. The Strait of Hormuz is in the conversation. Iran did vote to close that narrow body of water. No doubt their intentions are to cut the West from its very important body of water, which would stop oil shipments. However, as they've discussed for so long, that this is incredibly important for the urea movement. So if oil is the target, urea will be the innocent bystander caught up in this fight. So a little bit of updates there on fertilizers. But Delaney, what have we seen happening in other markets?
Certainly, a lot of attention is focused on next Monday's USDA annual acreage and quarterly grain stocks report, with corn and soybean planted acre estimates being front and center. Now, over the past 15 of the last 20 years, corn acres have been increased from USDA's March prospective plantings report to June's prospective plantings report. Ahead of the report, traders are certainly seeing some shoring up positions, as their reports in the past have tended to be pretty volatile. It is not uncommon for us to also see some limit-sized moves following the release of the June stocks and acreage report, so definitely something to watch on Monday. Monday will also be the first notice day on all July contracts, which could also add to that volatility. The other thing we've been watching here is weather, which of course has been favorable for a lot of crop production. So these factors have been adding some pretty bearish pressure on the markets as of late, but Monday's report could bring some major fireworks. On the livestock side, Thursday released our quarterly hogs and pigs report, and as of June 1st, there were about 75.1 million hogs and pigs on U.S. farms, up slightly from June of 2024 and up 1% from our March report. Other notable findings included, of the 75.1 million hogs, 69.2 million were market hogs and 5.98 million were kept for breeding. Between March and May of 2025, 34.2 million were weaned on U.S. farms, up 1% from the same period this 1 year earlier. From March through May, U.S. hogs and pigs producers weaned an average of 11.75 pigs per litter, and U.S. hog producers intend to have 2.97 million hogs farrowed between June and August. Cold storage also reported U.S. pork inventory is now at a 21-year low, and weekly export sales this week spiked 82% from the previous week. All of this has helped hogs with a steady rally, posting new contract highs in both the July and August contract earlier this week, before seeing a little bit of end-of-the-week correction here heading into Friday's session. Live cattle futures remained steady this week after their correction last week, while feeders have been trying to push higher, hovering just above the $300 per hundredweight mark in the August contract. So, no pun intended, but definitely going to see some fireworks on Monday, I think, here with that report. And we'll see how that holiday shortened week also impacts the markets, with Friday being the 4th of July shortened holiday week and that big report coming out on Monday.
Yeah, it's a reminder for you listeners. Our content will come out a day earlier for your enjoyment as well. We don't want you to go too long without catching the latest ag headlines. So make sure you stay tuned to our social media pages and catch that episode next week. But what do you say, Delaney, for today? Should we let them go?
Let's let them go.